Welcome to the Weird and Wonderful channel. So glad you could join me. Today we are looking at forgotten folk horror gems, underrated and obscure films that deserve more attention. Most discussions of the folk horror genre begin with what's known as the unholy trinity. Michael Reeves's Witchfinder General, 1968, Piers Haggard's The Blood on Satan's Claw, 1971, and Robin Hardy's The Wicker Man, 1973. These classics laid the foundation for modern folk horror, blending superstition, paganism, and the eerie isolation of rural landscapes. But what about the lesser-known films lurking in the shadows? What about the forgotten gems that deserve a second look? Here are 10 underrated folk horror films that bring a unique, often unsettling vision to the genre. The White Reindeer, 1952, director Eric Blomberg. A haunting and poetic tale from Finland, The White Reindeer is a mesmerizing piece of cinema, blending folk horror with shape-shifting mythology. The story follows Pirita, a lonely Laplander who seeks the aid of a shaman. Instead of rekindling her husband's love, she is cursed to transform into a vampiric white reindeer, preying on unsuspecting victims in the snow-covered wilderness. The dreamlike cinematography and eerie atmosphere make this one of the most visually striking entries in folk horror history. Captain Clegg, 1962, director Peter Graham Scott. Also known as Night Creatures, this Hammer horror classic is steeped in superstition and spectral hauntings. Set in the fog-drenched marshlands of 18th century England, the film follows a village plagued by ghostly riders, phantoms said to punish wrongdoers. With Peter Cushing in fine form and eerie imagery that lingers long after the credits roll, Captain Clegg is a gothic precursor to the folk horror boom of the 1970s. Markéta Lazarová, 1967, director Franciszek Vláčil. If folk horror had an epic medieval masterpiece, Markéta Lazarová would be it. Often considered the greatest Czechoslovakian film ever made, it plunges us into a brutal, snowbound world where Christianity and paganism clash in a violent struggle. Wolves prowl through desolate landscapes, and morality erodes in the face of raw medieval survival. Visually breathtaking and deeply unsettling, this is a must-watch for lovers of historical folk horror. Assault, 1971. Director Sidney Hayers. Also released as In the Devil's Garden. This unsettling thriller blends crime and folk horror in a deeply disturbing way. After a series of brutal attacks on schoolgirls, a small town is gripped by fear and paranoia. There's a sense of something older, something watching, lurking beneath the seemingly ordinary countryside. The film's use of power lines as eerie, silent witnesses to the crimes adds to its uneasy, hauntological feel. Doomwatch, 1972, director Peter Sasdy. What happens when folk horror meets eco-horror? Doomwatch provides the answer. Based on the cult BBC series, this film follows scientists investigating an island where the locals are changing. Their mutations aren't supernatural but caused by pollution. Yet the film leans heavily into folk horror's fear of the outsider and the eerie isolation of a superstitious rural community. A chilling take on real-world horrors masked as folklore. Neither the Sea Nor the Sand, 1972, director Fred Burnley. A forgotten gothic folk horror tale, this slow-burning film explores grief and resurrection. A lighthouse keeper dies suddenly, but doesn't stay dead. His lover, unable to let go, finds herself trapped in a relationship with something unnatural. This is no simple ghost story. It's a tale of love, loss, and a creeping, inevitable horror tied to the wild, unforgiving coastline. The Appointment, 1981. Director Lindsay C. Vickers. Starring Edward Woodward, the iconic lead from The Wicker Man. The Appointment is a deeply unnerving film about fate, premonition, and supernatural vengeance. A father begins experiencing visions of a fatal car crash. But is it paranoia or something far more sinister? The film's use of shadowy figures, spectral dogs, and an overwhelming sense of impending doom make it an underrated horror classic. Celia, 1989. Director Anne Turner. This Australian folk horror gem blends childhood imagination with creeping dread. Young Celia lives in a world filled with fairy tale creatures. But as her reality grows darker, so do her fantasies. Set against the Red Scare of 1950s Melbourne, Celia is a film where innocence is tainted by both political paranoia and supernatural horrors. A unique entry in the folk horror canon. Anchoress, 1993. Director Chris Newby. A visually stunning black and white historical horror, Anchoress is based on real medieval practices. A young woman is sealed away inside a stone cell, chosen to serve as a village's spiritual protector. But what begins as religious devotion soon spirals into a waking nightmare. One where reality bends and supernatural forces may be at play. Or is it madness? Featuring Christopher Eccleston and Pete Postlethwaite, this is a folk horror story of faith turned to obsession. Blackwood, 2014. Director Adam Wimperney. A modern entry in the genre, Blackwood is a psychological horror film that leans heavily into folk horror tropes. A troubled author, recovering from a breakdown, moves his family into an isolated countryside home. But reality begins to fracture. Strange figures appear, old legends resurface, and the past refuses to stay buried. With chilling imagery and a creeping sense of folk horror dread, Blackwood deserves a place in the modern horror conversation. The folk horror genre has always thrived on obscure, atmospheric, and deeply unsettling tales. Ones that tap into primal fears of isolation, ancient rituals, and the unseen forces lurking in the landscape. While the unholy trinity will always be the cornerstones of folk horror, these forgotten films offer new nightmares to explore. Have you seen any of these films? Do you have a favourite obscure folk horror gem? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe to Weird and Wonderful for more eerie explorations into the world of folk horror. And be sure to check out my books on Amazon. Be seeing you.